Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another video. Today's video we're going to be focusing on Tottenham Hotspur. A Tottenham Hotspur side that of course have been a bit up and down this past week. A bit of a roller coaster for Spurs, as last week of course they had the highs and the all happiness and the sunshine and rainbows of beating Manchester City, and then the lows of losing to Leicester City only several days later. Obviously, it's been a bit of an up and down week for Spurs. It was a game last week which many Tottenham fans saw as maybe being the start of a consistent run. If Tottenham can show this level of performance against Manchester City, then maybe they can continue to show it against other teams as well. And at the first hurdle of that, seems to have already failed. And we seem to be back where we normally are with Spurs, which is that they can normally beat Manchester City, and especially at home beat Manchester City, but then of course fail to teams that are around them, and once again that is shown here. We're going to be talking all about Tottenham though, because they have had a pretty interesting season, and of course we're going to be talking about how their season's gone so far, and maybe what the future holds for both Tottenham and for Antonio Conte, and what my personal thoughts are on these two things as well. But before we go any further, I would like to remind you all to please like the video and also subscribe if you're new. Both things are always and forever greatly appreciated. But for now, let's talk Tottenham. Interesting topic again, as it always seems to be with this club. I feel like Tottenham fans go through the same Tottenham cycle every single season though. I feel like the summer transfer window brings a lot of hope and a bit of optimism. They seem to always, they spend a bit of money. Whether that was big money or not, they seem to spend it on some players that have got a big prospect or a big future, or some level of optimism about them, shall we say. But then it doesn't quite pan out that way, and it doesn't pan out that way in terms of the individual players, or it doesn't turn out in terms of the collective performances on the pitch. You look at their summer spending, for example. Christian Romero obviously signed permanently, but other than that, you've got the likes of Yus Bissouma, who arrived for 25 million, and whilst it seemed like a massive bargain at the time, he's been a bit off, on and off, and there does seem to be a bit of a problem there in terms of his work with Antonio Conte. It does seem to be getting there sometimes, and then other times it just doesn't seem to be working. Been a bit hit and miss in my opinion. You've also got the transfer of Jed Spence. Again, another interesting one. Apparently not an Antonio Conte signing, which is why he's really featured this season, and he hasn't managed to get in the team ahead of another right back in Emerson Royal, who, whew, Jesus Christ, if you can't get in a team ahead of Emerson Royal, then you've seriously got some problems. Ivan Perisic, free transfer, looks to be the best of the bunch of transfers that have walked through the door at Spurs these past several months. Fraser Forster, obviously a backup to Hugo Lloris, of course. Not very rarely featured, although now that obviously Lloris is out, and although he's made a lot of errors this season, probably would be called upon to deputise for him. Lenglet, loan signing, bit of a stopgap maybe. And then, of course, the big one, Richarlison. And whilst the jury is still out on the likes of Pedro Porro and, of course, the loan signing in on out Danjuma, Richarlison's been the big one for me. That has obviously been a little bit overlooked, shall we say. I know he's had a couple of injuries this season, but for 50 million from Everton, Premier League experience, a lot of hype, mainly by his own mouth, because I don't actually think he's that good, or I don't believe he's to be. I feel like he's a bit overrated. I haven't really seen a lot from him, and I feel like again maybe it's a formation thing, maybe it's a strategy thing, maybe it's a manager style kind of thing, maybe it's something along those lines. But together, not exactly sparked this Spurs team to life, and I think that's where Spurs' seasons kind of fell away a little bit. Of course, they are still in the hunt for top four, and I guess at the beginning of the season, a lot of people would have said that they would be in the hunt for top four, so I guess that they are achieving that sort of goal right now, and whether or not they achieve that goal of getting top four or not, obviously remains to be seen. Right now, they're currently on the outskirts of it, but obviously they are still very much there, as obviously we've just crossed over the halfway point of the season. But for me, it's been a little bit underwhelming when you consider the fact that they got Antonio Conte, a world-class manager, who I think a lot of people had raised eyebrows about at the time when obviously he was announced. Why is Conte coming into this kind of club here with these kinds of players, this kind of ownership and the people behind him and etc. etc. I think a lot of people are expecting them to be a lot further on right now in their development than what they are. We know that Conte is a serial winner. We know that he likes instant results, and I personally don't feel like he's got them at all. And that's why I kind of feel like Tottenham's season's been very underwhelming this season for the most part. There have been the occasional performance here and there. Like I say, last week against Manchester City was probably the best performance of Spurs' season so far. There have also been a couple of others. You think about Southampton maybe, and so on and so forth. But it's just not been sustainable enough. And that was kind of my worry with Spurs all season, is that it's not sustainable enough. And I think I spoke about it earlier on in the season where I said the lack of good performances will hurt Spurs in the end. They're getting through games for the most part, and that is credit to Spurs, and that is, I guess, a bit of a development that they can actually go to these teams, not play very well, but get out of it. But again, they're relying on the individual qualities of certain players. You look at Harry Kane as prime example. Despite Spurs being a little bit lackluster, he seems to still be having no problem in finding the back of the net on a more consistent basis than a lot of other players. But you look at the likes of Son, who's dropped off a cliff this season in terms of form. Yes, he has shown little bits and flares here and there, and obviously he still has that danger of being Heung-min Son, one of the most dangerous players in the Premier League. But his form, consistent-wise, has not been there this season, and it's shown in the fact that the goals have dried up a little bit, the assists have dried up a little bit. He's just not the same player that he has been for the past few years. And again, hence why Harry Kane has seemingly dragged them through. You've also got the likes of Bentancur, who I think is pretty much underrated, but again, can't run that midfield on his own. You've got the likes of Kulusevski, who's been injured for a few parts of the season. He's been brilliant since obviously arriving in the Premier League, but again, his injuries haven't helped him or haven't helped the team, and of course he can't really do it on his own. In terms of attacking wise, Spurs seem set. It's defensively and individual errors based that this team falls apart on for the most part. Take last week's again performance as a prime example. The City performance was great. The City performance was their best performance of the season. Even Emerson Royale looked like a very competent and quality right back. It looked very good. It looked solid, and it looked like that could be the basis in which to really kick on from there and kind of secure top four. We've seen the results dry up a little bit for Newcastle over the past couple of weeks. Maybe this could be the start that Spurs needed to kick on from there and secure a top four finish. And then, of course, they go to Leicester. And it's the same old, same old. Tottenham normally win against Manchester City when they're at home. We've seen it time and time again. I think even under Nuno Espirito Santo, Tottenham managed to beat Manchester City and did so in a very, very good way, in a very smart way of doing it. But it's not sustainable. And again, they did last year as well. They beat City, and I think a few days later they went to Burnley, of all teams, relegated Burnley, and lost. It's just typical Spursy. Spursy go through the same cycle every year. Beat a big team, lose to a smaller team. Have a good transfer window, full of optimism. Don't let it translate onto the pitch. It's the same Spurs cycle in which certain Spurs fans are now realising this kind of cycle, and certain Spurs fans still go through this cycle time and time again. And I'm not trying to be at all disrespectful or anything. It's just the way that I see things from the outside looking in at Tottenham. There are certain big issues at the club. There are issues on and off the pitch. On the pitch, you've got individual errors that are being consistent. Certain players not being good enough, i.e. Eric Dyer. I've said it for years. I don't think Eric Dyer is particularly good enough for that Tottenham team or any top 6 team, but whatever. I think the manager needs to take some blame. Certain substitutions, certain team selections. I think maybe there's a certain way that he goes about setting up his team and everything. 9 times out of 10 this season, Tottenham go 2 goals down and then start to play. Why is that? Why is that something that happens with this team? Why do they go 2-0 down to then come back? It just baffles me, baffles my mind. So many times that's happened this season, and I thought it would happen again on Saturday actually when Leicester went into half time at winning 3-1, but of course that didn't happen. Issues in terms of management, issues in terms of players. Obviously, people will look to Daniel Levy and the Tottenham powers that be, the hierarchy that be, and say that they're not backing the manager enough, and so on and so forth. There might be a bit of evidence to that, obviously. There has been a fair bit of money, though, that has been thrown around. Like I say, 50 million on Richarlison, and he's been very underwhelming, which, you know, I expected. But no, like, there is problems. There is definitely problems. Again, I think Tottenham fans would like a little bit of clarity. There has been talk about selling up the club and about maybe some new owners coming in, or maybe someone coming in to take shares from the club and so on and so forth. I think there is a bit of clarity that Tottenham fans need on that kind of situation as well. But it shouldn't affect what's happening on the pitch. And like I said, on the pitch right now, it's underwhelming. It's not the best. It's below par for the most part. And the only thing that's seemingly dragging them through it is a certain England striker who, at this moment in time, will probably end his career with nothing to show for it. No trophies, no winners' medals, just a lot of individual performances, a few golden boots, and memories of what could have been. Imagination and thoughts and hypothetical situations of what could have been for him had he maybe taken that leap and joined another club, had he maybe forced his way out a bit more, been a bit more ruthless when it came to Tottenham. Of course, the likelihood is he's going to break a numerous amounts of goal records and have them to show for his career, but in a team sport, that's not going to be enough. Genuinely isn't going to be enough. And like I say, I think for Tottenham, they need a bit more clarity on the manager situation. Conte's contract is up at the end of the season. Is he going to stay? Is he going to go? Like, there was talk a few weeks ago about how Conte probably won't be the Tottenham manager come the end of the season. Is that going to be legitimate? Is that going to be something that he says now and then does a U-turn on later? There's many things that are up in the air at Spurs, and I feel like it could hang over them as the season progresses. And I think Tottenham have also benefited from the likes of Liverpool and Chelsea, particularly not being at their best, not being at the races. Otherwise, I think they could have been even further down than what they are right now. Not completely out of the top 4 race, like I say, they're still well within the running. But I just don't think Spurs would be where they are currently had those two teams in particular been at the races, been at where we've known them to be these past several years. And that's no disrespect to obviously what Tottenham have done or what certain individuals at that club have done, Conte, Kane, so on and so forth have done. It's just obviously their inconsistency has really shined through, but they've been a little bit overshadowed, I believe, by the failings, by the failure of what is perceived to be by the likes of Liverpool and Chelsea and so on. Does the manager walk at the end of the season? Does he stay? Obviously, if certain promises aren't met, he'll go. Because let's face it, the only way that you get Conte is when you promise him certain things. He was talked about as being the manager before Nuno Espirito Santo came in. They couldn't work out a deal. They couldn't compromise on certain things, it seemed, which is why that deal never took place. Then obviously when Tottenham got a little bit desperate, they were willing to compromise with things for him to become their new manager. Have those promises, have those demands been met? Highly doubt it. If that is the case, we know that Conte is not shy of just walking away whenever he feels like he's being disrespected or lied to. That could happen at the end of the season, which hence maybe why the rumours a few weeks ago started spiralling that he won't be the manager of Tottenham at the end of the season. And if that's the case, who does walk through the door? Because Tottenham have tried a lot of different managers with a lot of different styles over the past several years. who would walk through the door at Tottenham if obviously he was to walk. My personal opinion is Diego Simeone. I don't know where you'd go from there. Obviously, there's been a talk about Thomas Tuchel maybe crossing that Chelsea to Tottenham border like a few managers have in the past few years alone, hence Jose Mourinho, for example. You know, Andre Villas-Boas did it as well, and maybe one or two others. Thomas Tuchel could. He very well could. I personally think they'd go for Simeone, though, just because it's Tottenham. Simeone might want to try his luck in the Premier League, and plus I think maybe Tuchel would actually possibly go, or maybe is waiting for another job. That's, with all due respect, maybe a little bit higher up than what Tottenham have to offer him. But it's not good. It's not good when you go through several new managers, several different styles, different types of managers and everything in several short years. And again, Conte, world-class manager in terms of domestic competitions and everything. Obviously, I don't think Tottenham really, or the Tottenham powers that be in the hierarchy really know what they have with this guy and why he's so good, it seems. But again, I think also Conte isn't entirely blameless in what's happened with Spurs this season. And like I say, I think they should be a lot further on their development than they actually are. But I think there are several things that have gone against Spurs. Mainly the Premier League moving on, not being backed enough, not the Tottenham board not pulling their finger out enough in terms of backing him. Although they have backed him a fair amount, I think they could do more. Players not performing to their natural expectations. Again, is that a manager thing? Is that something down to the players? Obviously, they'll know more about it than I will from the outside looking in. I think there are just a few things that have gone wrong for Spurs this season, and although you know their failure is at this moment in time not being in a top 4 spot. Of course, there was a long way to go to the end of the season. They definitely could still achieve that, but I still think their performances state to me it's a little bit underwhelming. Their performances state to me that it's not where they expected to be at this point, and that's why I see it as a little bit more of a failure than what other teams might consider it to be, especially given the current state of their teams and their clubs, for example. But those are just the thoughts, comments, opinions, predictions, feelings of this guy. I want to know what you guys think. What do you make of Tottenham's season so far? What do you make of the Antonio Conte situation? What do you make of anything to do with Tottenham Hotspur regarding this campaign or maybe in future? How do you see things at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium going for the foreseeable future, for the rest of the season and maybe even beyond? I'd love to know your guys' thoughts, comments, opinions, predictions, feelings, whatever you want to call it, down below in the comment section, because I'm sure it'll make for interesting reading. Otherwise, hit that like button on the way up if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you're new, want to see more content like this. Both things are always in for a bit, greatly appreciated. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening. I've been Fletch. This has been another Fletch Talks video, and I'll see you all again soon in another video.